Yeah, hello. Welcome to the PMdistilled talk. Today we will be discussing about Scrum framework. So within 15 minutes time, you will get an overall idea of Scrum. So everything starts with a product backlog. A product backlog is the list of features or probable features that may or may not get into the product. The product owner maintains the product backlog. So it is a one-liner list of features, basically using Excel sheet or something like that. Not detailed requirements, one-liners. The system should have a login feature. Customer should be able to register. Customer should be the user should be able to refer it to somebody else. The user should be able to make payments through credit card, through debit card, through UPI. These kind of features are listed. That is the product backlog, which is allowed to grow indefinitely. That means when the product backlog stops growing, we have almost reached end of life of the product. So product backlog is allowed to grow indefinitely, owned by the product owner. And once the product backlog is done, then it is time to get into the sprint planning meeting. Sprint planning meeting is a 7 hour meeting. If the sprint duration, when I say sprint, it is the iteration or a 30-day cycle. Maximum is 30 days, but it could be 20 days also, it could be 10 days also. But maximum is 30 days. In Scrum, we call it as the sprint, whereas in other agile frameworks, we call it as the iteration. So before the start of the sprint, we get into a sprint planning meeting, which is a 7 hour meeting attended by the product owner, scrum master, and the team, development team. Uh, During the meeting, the product owner explains his wish list of features that must be developed during the sprint. Then the team brainstorms. They ask questions. The product owner provides answers to all their questions, and they even discuss about the capacity, the productivity of the previous sprint, and dependencies. So after all this brainstorming, uh, the team, the product owner, and the scrum master, they commit to a set of features which they can practically develop during the next sprint. So after the sprint planning meeting, the next day the sprint starts. Uh, the key output of the sprint planning meeting in practical terms, it is the tracking board, which will have three columns like to be done, being done, done, and the work is displayed there. And during the sprint, in ideal Scrum or in good Scrum, the team members are given freedom to volunteer the work they want to do. So team members, based on their capabilities, they pick up the task and they start doing it. Now here, many times when we move from a waterfall kind of model to Scrum, people will take some time to understand it, because the general belief is if there is no work allocation, the team cannot do it. But in reality, if you give freedom to the team members to choose their work, or if it is a self-organizing team, they will do it very responsibly. Nobody will pick up any task where they don't have the skill set, and even if somebody picks up a complex task, maybe others will be able to help him out to succeed in that task. That way, the learning will be much, much better. The ownership will be much, much better. So it is highly debated whether we should go for work volunteering or work allocation, so that you decide whatever is feasible for your culture. You have to decide on that. But from my experience, the moment it is work volunteering, the teaming is better, uh, the responsibility is better, the ownership is better. So try it out. If some teams, okay, they are not equipped, or they are not matured enough to go for work volunteering, in that case, you start with the work allocation, and then later on, when the maturity improves, once you understand the system completely, then you go for work volunteering. Uh, then during the sprint, every day we have a daily Scrum meeting. It is also known as a daily stand up meeting. It is a maximum 20 minutes meeting. We are talking about 10-member teams in Scrum. So here, each team member will get 2 minutes to talk, and they talk three things, like what did I do yesterday, what am I doing today, and what are the challenges I am facing, um, and where and all I need help. This he or she says to the rest of the uh, team. So these things are not told to the Scrum Master nor the product owner. The daily Scrum meeting is the team's meeting. So they just share the status of the work with the rest of the team. It is not very easy. Okay. So if you're a performer, you love it because you have something concrete to tell the team every day. But if you are really struggling to produce a complete task, then sometimes the peer pressure will be much, much higher on the team. So and it is ideally, so this daily meeting or daily Scrum meeting or the daily stand-up meeting, now in a virtual, when you work from home, the daily stand-up meaning is lost. So obviously the daily Scrum is better. um, Before we used to insist on co-located team. Now because of work from home, the co-location may not be possible. We may have to do it on the virtual meeting platforms. So there is some innovation required there. Uh, so at the end of the, so it is better to have a fixed place and a fixed start time and end time for these daily Scrum meetings, so that the scheduling overhead can be avoided. And after some time, this becomes a habit for the team. They come on time and start the meeting automatically. Now, at the end of the so this, if the 30-day sprint, the 30-day they sprint, and the tracking board is updated on a daily basis. And we have most of the teams, they use a burn down chart also, which I'll explain in another session. I'll have a detailed session on what is a burn down chart, how to update it. Those things we'll discuss in another session. So all we need to understand here is the status of progress is updated on a daily basis, so that all of the stakeholders will get the status on a daily basis. Plus, collectively, the team can see the status, and that itself creates peer pressure to make the sprint successful. Then comes the sprint review meeting. So during the planning meeting itself, the sprint review meeting date and time is decided, and at that particular time, All the key stakeholders come and sit, and the team has to demonstrate the increment of the product they built during the sprint. Uh, it is a good practice to write the acceptance criteria of the features uh, during the planning meeting itself. So during the sprint review meeting, these acceptance tests are run uh, again on the completed features, and if all the features are passed through the agreed upon acceptance test, then we say the sprint is successful. But if there is a, let's say we plan for 10 features, 9 are successful, 1 failed, then we may say the sprint is a failure. It doesn't really matter. As long as the productivity is much higher than the waterfall models, and as long as the productivity is improving sprint after sprint, a failed sprint doesn't matter much. Sometimes we hear terms like a release sprint and normal sprints. So one side we have the product backlog. Then we have to spread this product backlog into multiple sprints. And at the end of a series of sprints, we may have a release to the customer or to the market. Then again, another series of sprints. Then there is a release sprint. So prior to releasing, at the end of every sprint, we don't release the product to the market. But at the end of certain sprints, we'll release the increment to the market. Then we call it as a release sprint. So during the release sprint, we may do or we may give more focus on the quality aspects, reliability aspects of the and security aspects of the product to be shipped. So here the key thing is at the end of every sprint, we don't make a release. So we have the product backlog, we have the series of sprints. We call it as the product roadmap. And within the roadmap itself, we'll decide how many releases we'll be making and how many sprints will end up in a release. So product roadmap contains multiple release points, and the features are spread across releases. We call it as release planning. So if you have to start the first sprint itself, we may have to complete the release planning, and based on that only we can mobilize the resources, we can identify the skill set, mobilize the resources, because each sprint may need a different skill set. For example, the initial sprint, the sprint number 0, sometimes we call it as sprint 0, that is all about setting up the environment. And maybe the earlier sprint, our focus will be on the architecture. So we may not develop a lot of features in the earlier sprint. It is about putting the architecture in place, the standards in place, and testing the architecture for scalability and reliability and stress testing and stuff like that. So then we need more experienced architects to work in the earlier sprints. And then we get into the development stage. At that time, we need more programmers and people with the ability to test and stuff like that. But again, here another key point I want to bring to your notice is uh, in Scrum, there are only 3 roles. We have a product owner, we have a Scrum master, and we have the development team. When we say development team, it is a group of technical people with some skill sets. The development team comprises of architects, uh, programmers, testers, uh, yeah, and the reviewers, test automators, all these guys are part of the development team, and they are known as the development team as just one team. And it is the collective responsibility of the entire team to make the sprint successful. So we discussed about product backlog. We discussed about sprint planning, sprinting, work volunteering, daily scrum, sprint reviews, and the last ceremony in the sprint is the sprint retrospective. So at the end of the sprint, the team does a brainstorming session on or a lessons learned session on what all things we did right and what all things we or can be improved. That is a retrospective, and these retrospective findings are pumped back into the next sprint planning meeting so that corrective actions gets implemented immediately. You don't wait for the next project to happen to put the corrective actions in place. Immediately, the learnings are incorporated into the subsequent sprint. Hence, we say that all agile models, including Scrum, they go with a PDSA cycle, that is, quick, plan, do, study, and act. Don't spend too much time in planning, a little bit of planning, try to do things. We may be successful or we may fail, but still we learn from it. Then the learning gets carried forward into the subsequent sprint. So all agile models, including Scrum, revolves around plan, do, study, and act. Quick PDSA cycles. Thank you very much.